Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're your shortcut to, well, getting smart about some really compelling source material without maybe doing all the heavy lifting yourself.
That's the plan.
And today, you are definitely joining us for something.
Well, it's kind of bizarre. We're digging into these mind-bending links between personal crises, psychic energy, and, believe it or not, global climate control.
Yeah, it's one of those sessions that really makes you tilt your head. We're peeling back layers in a way that suggests your next big thunderstorm might just, well, collective anxiety boiling over. It's fascinating, maybe a little chilling too.
Definitely have that vibe.
Yeah.
So our source today, we're going back into some classic channeled stuff. This is session 56 of the Seth Material, specifically from the early sessions, book 2. And the date on record is Monday, May 25th, 1964, right at 9 p.m.
And our goal here, as always, is clarity. We want to pull out the key knowledge from this single session, explore these really critical connections Seth draws between, say, psychic illness and physical stuff happening to the body.
And then there's this huge idea about weather being like an emotional safety valve for the whole planet. Plus, some pretty complex stuff on gender and reincarnation laws.
It's a lot to unpack, and just before we jump in, we want to be really clear. This deep dive, everything we discuss here, it's being distributed completely free of charge.
Yep.
On all the major platforms. It's purely for educational purposes, just to help you access and hopefully understand these pretty profound ideas.
And we absolutely have to credit the Seth Material itself and the publisher, New Awareness Network, for making this work available. It's foundational stuff.
Okay, so the session kicks off promising some big reveals, like why the weather messes with our moods, but also how our moods mess with the weather.
Yeah, that blew my mind a bit.
And get this, how a collapsed lung might actually be a subconscious strategy to, like, dodge responsibility. Okay, yeah, let's definitely unpack that. All right, so to really get what's going on in this session, you kind of have to start where Joseph, the observer, starts. Before the channeling even began.
The context, yeah. It's crucial.
The atmosphere in their circle was apparently super thick with anxiety. And it's because of two separate, pretty severe things that happened just 2 days before on the same day, Saturday, May 23rd.
And Joseph's notes here are meticulous. He's laying out the personal drama, the real-world events that Seth is about to give this cosmic-level explanation for.
Okay, so event number 1 concerns a Miss Callahan. Joseph notes her behavior was really weird. He actually stresses that in the 4 years they had lived near her, they never saw her just sitting out on her front porch. And suddenly, there she was, restless, visible. Why is that detail, the porch sitting, why is that highlighted?
Well, it speaks volumes, psychically speaking. It's a break in routine, sure, but it's more than that. It suggests a kind of dissolving personal boundary. The ego, which usually holds our specific identity together, keeps things contained, it was starting to falter. Sitting on the porch, that semi-public space, for someone inherently private. Like tangible proof her usual psychic walls were crumbling. Seth later says she wasn't easy within their confines anymore. That's the phrase.
That makes sense. And the doodling, that image is so vivid. Jane Rubert, in the channeling context, had visited her and saw her just constantly doodling, writing on a pad, but like without seeming to know she was doing it.
Yeah.
And her memory was apparently shot too.
That compulsive writing, the drawing, without any conscious intent, that's the energy the ego just can't manage anymore. It can't channel it productively. It's like psychic static spilling out onto the page, proof of a major inner crisis happening just beneath the surface.
Right. An emergency nobody consciously called 911 for.
Exactly.
Okay. Event number 2. Their friend, Bill McDonnell. Same exact evening, May 23rd. Bill's performing in these Japanese no plays over at Elmira College.
Intense stuff, no place.
And right after the performance, bang, severe chest and back pain just grabs him.
Then it escalated fast.
Yeah.
By the next day, he's in the hospital, collapsed lung, and it was blistered too. Just a really brutal, sudden physical breakdown.
And that date, May 23rd, that was the kicker.
Yeah.
Because Jane had this psychic flash late that night. She saw this really disturbing image of sickly hands.
Right.
So Joseph and Jane, they immediately connect the dots back to an earlier session where Seth had mentioned May 23rd. Not just once, but twice.
Yeah, and they got into this whole psychic detective mode. Like, wait, did Seth get it wrong? Did Jane maybe distort the message somehow? It looked like a possible glitch in the matrix, you know?
A continuity error in the cosmic script.
Something like that. And Seth addresses this right away.
Yeah.
And his clarification is actually really important for understanding how channeling works, or at least how he says it works.
So he confirms Miss Callahan's thing was a psychio-physical crisis, just as predicted. But the date confusion, he says, flat out, the double mention was not a distortion.
And that's the key distinction he makes. He calls it a partial blocking by Rupert, by Jane the medium. He says, and this is a direct quote, the two separate mentions of the same date did refer to two separate events that would occur on that same day.
Okay, so the intel was good. Two separate crises predicted for the 23rd. But Rupert's conscious filter only let the details about Miss Callahan, the one she was already worried about, come through clearly twice. It sort of fuzzed out the message about Bill.
Exactly.
Why is that difference blocking versus distortion such a big deal?
Well, think about it. A distortion means the source info was flawed, or the medium's mind twisted into something else. But a blocking that implies the info itself was accurate, just incomplete, censored almost. Maybe Jane's unconscious, hesitated to deliver a really specific, harsh, physical prediction about a close friend like Bill. So it put up this temporary filter. The core message danger on May 23rd got through, but the specifics got garbled. And Seth actually notes this. He says a block, even though it left them up in the air, is, quote, not nearly as troublesome basically as a distortion, because it means the underlying information stream is still considered reliable, even if the human filter isn't always perfect.
Wow. It really gives you a glimpse into the sheer difficulty of trying to transmit pure information through a human consciousness with all its filters and anxieties.
The signal was pure. The receiver had some static. Okay, so now we have the setup, the two incidents on the same day. And we can really dig into these two case studies Seth presents. They're brilliant contrasts, actually.
Yeah, how so?
You've got Miss Callahan's crisis, which is all about the ego dissolving from the inside out. And then Bill McDonald's crisis, which looks more like subconscious avoidance tactics. Let's start with Miss Callahan.
Seth calls her situation psychic one mainly, right? Meaning the root cause was internal, not like external stress piling up.
Exactly. It wasn't something happening to her, it was something happening within her. Seth explains the core problem as a dispersion, capital D. Yeah. He describes it as the ego finding it harder and harder to hold energy together in the usual forms of personal identity. Imagine your ego is like a central switchboard, directing all your energy, keeping you feeling like you.
Okay.
When that switchboard starts sparking and failing, the energy just goes. Well, Seth says it flies every which way, uncontrolled. Her weird behaviors, the restlessness, the memory loss, the doodling symptoms of that energy just spilling out chaotically.
So if the ego's dispersing, what's that feel like? What happens when the switchboard goes down?
Well, according to Seth, it's terrifying. Because the ego, which is basically our mechanism for definition and separation, it suddenly comes face-to-face with a bigger, unlimited source it usually walls itself off from.
The subconscious, inner self.
Bingo. Seth pinpoints the peak of her crisis at 2:30 a.m. She wakes up, and this is chilling phrasing. She was momentarily completely naked of ego, face-to-face with the subconscious, and sensing the inner self within.
Wow. Naked of ego. That sounds like total loss of self, no boundaries, no personality.
It's the ultimate existential gut punch for the conscious mind, right? The ego suddenly realizes this vast, powerful force it's been fighting or ignoring the inner self isn't some enemy. It's actually the, quote, most familiar, omnipresent inner self against which it was now powerless.
No.
And that direct confrontation, it caused momentary terror. The brain literally couldn't process that flood of unfiltered, raw reality about its own fundamental nature.
And it wasn't just psychological terror, right? Seth mentioned physical consequences.
Oh, yeah. He's very specific. He says further blocks of actual brain cells were destroyed that evening. This breakdown halted, quote, cooperation between the inner self and the physical body. The physical damage was a direct result of the ego's inability to cope with that sudden, overwhelming glimpse of its own limited reality.
Jeez. So the body basically had to short-circuit parts of itself just to survive the shock.
That's one way to put it. A really stark example of psychic dynamics causing physical destruction.
Okay, let's switch gears then. Bill McDonald. The collapsed lung. This feels less cosmic horror, maybe? More like a calculated move, even if it was unconscious?
Yeah, it's a classic case in these terms of the body stepping in to solve a problem the conscious mind is refusing to deal with. And the setting is key. The Japanese no play.
Why the no play? What's the significance there?
Seth is really specific about this. He says the performance itself represented the springboard for the inner portrayal, unfortunately, of sacrifice.
Ah.
No plays, they often deal with really profound themes, right? Ghosts, redemption, duty, sometimes literal sacrifice.
Ah.
So Bill, by performing this intense material, was already mentally and emotionally swimming in this atmosphere of like solemn duty and sacrifice.
Okay.
And he apparently used that dramatic context as a kind of psychological launch pad for a real-world escape hatch. The collapsed lung, Seth says directly, was an attempt to put off responsibility.
So his body basically manufactured the most dramatic, undeniable excuse possible to avoid his professional duties, finding his own place.
Both. Exactly. Yeah. The inner self and maybe the subconscious saw this pile up of responsibilities coming, work stuff, the social complexity of leaving home, and it just engineered a physical crisis that demanded a timeout.
The timing is wild, though.
Isn't it? Seth points out he dared not fall sick until the final night of the play's run. Think about that.
Whoa.
His subconscious deliberately held the physical breakdown in check just long enough for him to feel his creative obligation to play. Then, bam, the curtain falls, and then it triggers the collapse to get him out of the personal obligations waiting in the wings.
That implies such precise control. Even if it's unconscious, it's like his body had a schedule.
It really does suggest that.
Yeah.
And it connects directly to his family situation.
Yeah.
Seth is very clear. Bill needs to leave home. He needs to recognize how his mother is dominating him, how he's dependent on that dynamic. If he doesn't face that consciously, Seth says he just fights phantoms and uses up valuable energy that he now desperately needs. The physical collapse is almost like an aggressive intervention. It forces him out of the situation, demands rest, demands reflection, which is exactly what he needed to break that cycle of dependence.
So Miss Callahan has this inner collapse, forcing of physical retreat. Bill engineers an outer physical collapse to force a needed internal shift.
Beautifully put. Both cases just hammer home this absolute non-negotiable link Seth sees between psychic states and physical reality.
Okay, so if part 2 is about the mind's power over the individual body, here's where Seth just zooms way, way out. He goes from personal drama to this huge, revolutionary statement about the entire planet's atmosphere.
Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting, doesn't it? We go from the body as this stage for psychic battles to the atmosphere as a kind of collective emotional sponge.
The core idea is what he says it plainly, right?
He does. Quote, "The weather does indeed affect your moods, even as your moods affect the weather." And he's not being poetic here. In this system, that's presented as a fundamental law, like psychic physics.
Okay, gotta break that down. How does my specific bad mood, festering about traffic or whatever, how does that translate into a cloud? What's the mechanism?
All right, it starts with understanding what weather is, according to Seth. He calls it loosely formed, mainly unconstructed energy. Think of it like raw potential. Unlike us humans, who Seth calls purposeful gestalts with strong centralized psychic control.
We have egos, basically.
Right, we have identity forms. The elements, air molecules, water vapor, they don't. They lack that kind of individual self-control.
So they're just blank slates waiting to be written on.
Not entirely blank. This is key. Seth says these particles, these molecular structures, they have a generalized subconsciousness. And importantly, a need for value fulfillment.
Okay, hold on. Value fulfillment. For an air molecule, how does that work? They don't have ambitions or dreams.
Huh. Right, not like we do. In Seth's terms, value fulfillment isn't about becoming unique or achieving personal goals. For a molecule, it's about participating in the whole. It's about being an essential component in creating larger phenomena.
Okay.
So when these non-identity structures, air, moisture, interact with really strong, charged emotional patterns coming off humans, they become, quote, pure emotional constructions. They fulfill their value by becoming the vehicle, the manifestation, for this intense energy that we individuals can't seem to contain ourselves.
So when I'm absolutely furious about something, but I bite my tongue, I don't yell, I don't punch a wall, that energy doesn't just vanish.
Nope. According to this, it has to go somewhere. It gets discharged, dumped out into this non-identity molecular realm. That's the process Seth calls psychic osmosis. We're literally leaking our excess emotional energy into the atmosphere.
Wow.
And these molecular structures, they receive it, they transmit it, and eventually they form weather patterns as a result of that collective emotional charge.
Okay, but if they're constantly soaking up our psychic junk, don't they get overloaded? or need to recharge?
Absolutely. It has to be a cycle, right? It needs balance. So when these structures of space, as he calls them, get emptied of emotional energy, maybe after a big discharge like a storm, they then tap the human source and animal sources too to basically recharge themselves.
And the flip side.
The flip side is when we feel psychically drained, depleted, exhausted, we subconsciously drain off reserves from non-identity molecular sources to kind of top ourselves up.
Which explains perfectly why you often feel so energized, almost cleansed, after a really dramatic thunderstorm passes.
Exactly. The storm is the big discharge, the clearing of the air, literally and psychically. And then we're subconsciously drawing energy back from that freshly recharged atmosphere.
So this whole cycle is not just random. Seth calls it, what? A safety valve.
An important safety valve.
Yeah.
That's the critical function here. Identity forms, like us humans, apparently just can't handle the sheer volume of surplus energy generated by our complex thoughts and emotions, especially collectively.
We'd overload.
We'd short circuit, basically. If we couldn't vent this excess energy into the atmosphere, it would lead to like a global emotional system meltdown.
So the atmosphere isn't just weather patterns, it's an active planetary emotional regulation system.
That's the implication. And it's massive. Seth claims the fundamental energy behind, say, a personal screaming match and a physical hurricane is the same, just a difference in scale and manifestation.
And he takes this straight into global politics, doesn't he? The connection between war and natural disasters. He actually says, quote, "Your wars are excess, poorly controlled emotional energy."
Yeah, and here comes the really provocative part. We have to unpack this carefully. Seth claims, and I quote again, "In many cases, you have been saved from wars by such things as earthquakes, tornadoes of a vast nature, and other physical catastrophes."
Saved from wars by earthquakes. That sounds counterintuitive, to say the least.
Right. But the logic follows his premise, that destructive instinct we see in humanity. He frames it as an inability to control emotional energy. If that overwhelming collective aggression builds up, and it can't be channeled into a war, which is oddly a more controlled human-defined outlet for that energy,
then it has to go somewhere else.
it must find an outlet in the non-identity realm. It manifests as a massive, seemingly random natural disaster.
So the earthquake or the hurricane acts like a colossal psychic bleed-off valve.
Exactly. It draws off enough of that built-up aggression, that global psychic pressure, that it actually prevents the trigger being pulled on a potentially larger, more horrifying human-orchestrated catastrophe like a world war. It's a lesser evil preventing a greater one in this view. The weather, in its extremes, becomes the reluctant peacekeeper.
That completely flips how we usually think about climate and hardship. We tend to assume a harsh climate leads to scarcity, which then causes conflict and suffering.
Seth turns that right on its head. He says, and this is another direct quote, "Where there is great privation, there will be a cruel climate, but the climate does not cause the privation. The emotional aggression caused by privation caused the climate."
Whoa. Okay, so if a society is riddled with internal conflict, bad leadership, resentment, that collective negative emotional state doesn't just cause social problems, it actually physically impacts the long-term weather patterns, leading to drought or floods, which then reinforces the suffering.
That's the proposed chain of causality. Emotional state, climate, physical conditions reinforces emotional state. It's a feedback loop.
Which leads us right into things like traditional rain dances, which science usually dismisses as superstition.
But Seth gives them the ultimate validation. He says flat out, "The Indian rain dances worked," and then adds, "Perhaps now you can understand the reason."
Because it wasn't about praying to some external sky god. It was about focused emotional energy.
Exactly. A community coming together, intensely focusing a massive shared emotional energy, the deep need, the collective desire for rain, and directing that psychic force into the molecular structure of the atmosphere.
A deliberate, beneficial energy discharge.
Yes. A focused, successful discharge of emotional need that provided the necessary psychic push to influence the formation of weather patterns. The energy was real, the effect was real, the explanation people gave themselves back then that they were appeasing spirits or sacrificing to the elements that was just their best guess, a misinterpretation of a natural psychic law. The atmosphere responds to focused emotional energy.
Okay, quick detour here. Joseph, the note-taker, brings up some confusion about his brother Lauren. Apparently, in earlier sessions, Seth gave conflicting info, sometimes saying Lauren had been a woman in past lives, sometimes a man.
Yeah, it's a good example of how tricky transmitting this kind of complex reincarnation data can be. Seth clarifies it here. He says Lauren had, in fact, been a man 3 times previously.
So why the confusion? Why did Rupert get the impression he'd been female?
Because, Seth explains, Rupert was picking up on the overall impression of the personality, which felt female, despite the male physical lives.
Wait, 3 lives as a man, but the overall vibe is female. How does that even work? That sounds like a major identity clash.
It does, but Seth offers a really nuanced psychological reason. He suggests that when a personality reincarnates repeatedly as just one-sex male, in Lauren's case, they can actually develop strong and overly compensated for female characteristics.
Overcompensated.
Yeah, like the very act of constantly reinforcing the male identity, perhaps out of an underlying fear or avoidance of the female experience, leads to this exaggerated internal focus on the opposite polarity. Seth says the continuous male lives are evidence of an already developed fear.
So, by trying so hard not to be female, he kind of ended up intensely focused on female characteristics internally. His inner identity got defined by the very thing he was running from.
That's exactly the idea. Lauren's personality is described as basically female.
Yeah.
Because of this energetic dynamic of avoidance and overcompensation. That's what caused the confusion in the earlier readings. The inner reality was bleeding through, despite the physical history.
Wild. Okay, so this leads Seth into a much bigger discussion, right? Connecting gender itself to really fundamental cosmic laws. He says male and female concepts are reflections of, what was it, arrival and departure?
Yes. Other basic inner laws of the universe are related to arrival and departure. This is absolutely core to Seth's whole metaphysical system. Arrival and departure aren't just opposites. They're the fundamental rhythm of existence. Creation and destruction. Expansion and contraction.
2 sides of the same coin.
Exactly. Arrival is creation, building up. Departure is destruction, breaking down. But crucially, the destruction, the departure, is just as necessary as the arrival. You need the breakdown of old forms to make space for new creation, new arrivals.
So destruction serves creation.
Precisely. Seth uses the example of man the hunter. The hunter's destructive act, in this view, serves the higher purpose of creativity and arrival, maybe by providing sustenance, clearing space, participating in the life cycle.
Okay, so how does this map onto male and female principles?
They represent different dynamics within that arrival-departure cycle, different ways energy is used and discharged. One principle might be more associated with the generative, cohesive force arrival, creation.
Yeah.
The other might align more with the dispersive, sometimes aggressive energy departure, destruction.
But both are needed for balance.
Essential. Both modes of energy use and discharge are required to maintain balance, psychically, emotionally, physically. This isn't just about individual psychology, it's woven into the fabric of nature.
Including the weather stuff we just talked about?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Seth implies these male and female principal energies are necessary for counterbalancing effects within weather patterns, within nature as a whole. If one energy gets way out of whack, say, too much uncontrolled, aggressive departure energy globally, it manifests as instability, maybe extreme weather. Lauren's personal imbalance is like a microcosm of potential cosmic imbalance.
So what's the upshot for Loren specifically? What's his path forward?
Seth is pretty direct. He says Lauren's current situation, this deep imbalance, isn't sustainable for achieving true wholeness. He states Lauren must eventually have a female reincarnation, quote, even to give validity to his masculinity.
Wow.
The overcompensation won't resolve the underlying fear. He needs to actually face and integrate the experience of the opposite cosmic principle he's currently avoiding. Only then can his masculinity be truly grounded and valid, not just a reaction against something else. All right, so after all that high-level metaphysics, weather, reincarnation, cosmic laws, Seth brings it right back down to earth. He gives some very pointed, very practical advice to Jane, who he calls Rupert, and Joseph.
Yeah, this is where the rubber meets the road, right?
Yeah.
Applying the big ideas to just living day to day.
Exactly, integration. And the main focus is on Rupert's energy management, especially around his creative work, the channeling itself. Seth tells him he needs to confine himself to using his best energy for the daily creative work.
And stop what? Stop worrying so much.
Stop the massive energy drain that comes from worrying about how the material he's already channeled is being received out there in the cold world, as Seth puts it.
The practical application of energy conservation. Don't waste it on stuff you can't control.
Precisely. Rupert is apparently hemorrhaging valuable, finite psychic energy, worrying about external results, publication, recognition, what editors think, instead of just focusing purely on the quality and integrity of the information coming through him. Seth says he needs inner freedom.
Makes sense. He actually says if Rupert were more concerned with the quality of daily material and less with outer success and recognition, he would not be in such a mental turmoil and emotional turmoil. That anxiety is just eating up his energy.
And it's manifesting physically, just like Bill McDonald's lung, though maybe less dramatically. Seth observes that Rupert, quote, takes out his aggression against editors upon his own body, which is highly ridiculous.
Ouch. So he's turning that frustration inward.
Yeah, instead of letting that aggressive energy discharge constructively, or even just letting it dissipate into the atmosphere like we talked about, he's basically psychically punching himself.
Which is why the advice gets so mundane. Like, do your back exercises, take a short walk in the morning. How does that help with cosmic level psychic stress?
Because it forces a reconnection with the physical body. It provides a simple, structured, healthy way to discharge some of that pent-up energy. It grounds him. The body needs that physical outlet to maintain balance. Seth even assures him that, yeah, he might resent losing the time, but he'd more than gain it back in renewed focus and energy.
Practical magic. And for Joseph, the observer, the artist, the advice is more of a compliment, right?
It is, yeah. It's validating his own growth through this process. Seth notes that Joseph's painting is, quote, beginning to show the results of greater psychic understanding, which will transpose itself into content and technique.
So the deep dives are showing up on the canvas.
Exactly. His art is starting to reflect the deeper truths he's grappling with in these sessions.
And they both clearly need a break. Like, Bill needed his forced time out. Seth confirms their upcoming vacation later in the year will be really beneficial, especially for Rupert, given the internal pressure cooker Seth just described.
Yeah, Rupert needs it more, Seth says plainly. And Seth kind of wraps up by underlining how important this particular session 56, really is. He calls the material very important and says it'll be the foundation for new avenues the work will explore.
And he ends with that great line, saying he still looks in on them. What was it?
Sometimes to my amusement and sometimes to my amazement. It's such a human touch, almost.
Yeah, it really is. And he encourages them to keep trying those psychological time experiments, too. Referencing Jane almost seeing their sick friend's hands, it shows this isn't just theory. It's about constantly experimenting, constantly applying this stuff. Hashtag tag, 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 outro.
So just to kind of synthesize everything we've covered in this pretty dense deep dive, I think the huge takeaway is just the absolute interconnectedness of everything.
Yeah.
We saw psychic cause and effect in really stark terms, right? How subconscious stuff directly creates physical reality, whether it's illness or maybe even brain changes.
And then the massive idea, the really revolutionary one, is the weather system. This notion that it's not just physics, but it's this active, responsive, emotional energy regulator for the entire planet.
It really blurs the lines, doesn't it? The lines we usually draw between me and not me, between my body and the atmosphere outside. Seth just dissolves them. It suggests the whole world is this one vast, interconnected, energy-exchanging system, all parts seeking what he calls value fulfillment.
Yeah, Session 56 really does offer the shortcut to seeing that managing your own internal landscape, dealing with your anxieties, your aggressions, facing your ego stuff, it's not just about personal health anymore.
Right. It has potentially global implications if you follow this logic.
Yeah.
Energy management, whether it's yours personally or the planet's collectively, becomes absolutely crucial for maintaining balance and preventing crisis on all levels.
So if this has piqued your interest, if you want to dive deeper into this really mind-bending but also strangely practical material, we absolutely encourage you to check out the Early Sessions Book 2 and really all the Seth Material books.
They're worth the time. You can find more resources, the books themselves, lots of information directly from the publisher, New Awareness Network. Their website and bookstore are the place to go.
And that specific URL for the early sessions is sethcenter.com/the early sessions.
That's sethcenter.com/the early sessions.
Okay, so we'll leave you with this final thought to chew on, kind of building on that whole safety valve idea. If collective emotional stress on a global scale can actually manifest as, say, catastrophic storms, what specific kind of emotional charge do you think might be manifesting right now in the climate of your own immediate personal environment?
Good question.
Is it avoidance? Is it suppressed anger? Maybe a kind of low-grade fear needing validation? What personal storm maybe are you ready to discharge constructively, safely before it builds up too much?
Something to think about. Thanks so much for joining us on this deep dive.
We'll see you next time.